Well, thank you very much for joining me today. Full house and some. It's going to make me a bit more nervous to go through my presentation for you guys today. But let's make a quick start, and we'll go through the contents that we'll deal with today. So I'll do a very quick introduction about myself. We'll look at our background and challenges that we faced in our organization to implement our data lakehouse, our implementation journey, why we went with the lakehouse in the end, and then some of the lessons learned. Okay, so just a very quick introduction of myself. My name is Silva. I run the Now Pensions Data Platform. I've worked in the financial services industry for over 20 years, predominantly in the data management, business intelligence, and engineering areas. I'm very passionate about data, and hopefully most of you are as well. So if we talk about our background, so what I'll do is I'll just give you a quick overview of where we started. So I cut my teeth using SQL Server, and that's where I did most of my early days in my career. And when I started at Now Pensions, that's where we were as well. They were working with SQL Server. We had a SQL data warehouse. There was nothing wrong with the infrastructure. In actual fact, our infrastructure was really, really good. Everything was infrastructure as code. Everything's deployable. It was very good. Our DevOps teams and data ops teams did an amazing job on the infrastructure side of things. But where it let us down was scaling it. Obviously, we had lots of new data coming in. Our business was growing exponentially, and what we didn't have is weren't able to scale efficiently to the size that they wanted us to be, but also it became really costly. So that was sort of the background. I've got a few bullets here that I want to touch on with you guys in terms of memorable challenges that we've had with the data and our processes. So, for example, we had resource bottlenecks. All good? We had some resource bottlenecks, which basically for us in the team was, we had a centralized data team, and that data team was not only managing the data platform, so that's the SQL servers, managing the backup strategy, loading the data, making sure all of that's happening, but this team was also the same team that had to build the data products, had to deal with the data quality issues, had to also define the definitions of the data. So you can imagine, I'm sure you can all resonate that you've all been there or are still struggling to get out of that problem. So we, as a team, became a resource bottleneck for our business, because our business was growing. They were getting more intelligent using the data. They wanted more data quicker, and we just couldn't keep pace with them because we were sort of held back dealing with our legacy problems. Scalability was also for us an issue. Like I said, not so much on the infrastructure side of things, we had that nailed, but it became quite a costly setup to run our SQL servers and continuously making it bigger and bigger and adding more RAM and CPU to it. We really struggled on the lack of clear ownership of the data. So this was a big problem for us. Our users were very good using the data. They were very good making decisions on that data, but as soon as you talk to them about who owns the data or the data quality issues around that data, they would run a mile. Not that they didn't want to deal with the problem, they didn't know how to deal with the problem. There was no guidelines in place, there was no governance to look after that data ownership side of things. And that we then entered a situation where we had inconsistent definitions and metrics. So you have two different teams trying to do the same thing but getting a different answer. And our executive got really frustrated, and you can imagine why. They're trying to run the business on good quality data, but they're getting different results from different teams. And that all meant that when we built new data products, it was really slow to build those data products, because really that same team that's managing your data platform is also managing your data quality, is building out your definitions. They're doing everything, right? So we were really slow building out any new data products. And as you can imagine, that team being our team firefighting all the time, we had limited self-service capabilities because we couldn't make the time and effort to actually build in those self-service capabilities. So that's sort of a little background of where we start. And I'm sure this is not unique to our company, and this resonates probably with most of you, that your data teams are really, really busy, and you got to look at those data teams and figure out whether or not you want them to be a data management team or a support team for your business functions. So if we move on to our implementation journey, well, we sat down, probably in 2021, we sat down and we said, look, we need to figure out how are we going to deal with all these problems that we've got. And we said, okay, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out how do we shift our governance to the left. What I mean by that is let the domain team start taking ownership of their data, making sure that they start looking at that data quality, start treating that data as products, start treating those data in the same way that you would if you were building software. Put all that governance and control that you've got around doing software engineering, put that around your data engineering as well. And then we also said, look, we need to sort out how people access the data, who decides when they can access the data and how they can use that data. So putting in that federated governance. And ultimately, we wanted to make sure that we have a self-service platform so that we can release our data engineers to actually monitor and manage the data platform rather than actually having to build the data products themselves as well. So if you know your data mesh principles, I've pretty much just summed up all four of them. So for us, when we looked at that, we sort of looked at all the different methodologies. We looked at Fabric, we looked at data mesh, and we sort of landed somewhere in the middle, which is like a hybrid. But I would say we're probably more towards the mesh than we are towards hybrid. So once we've sort of set out our vision and we knew what architecture we wanted and we knew that we want to sort out the ownership models, it was quite easy for me really to then go away with the team and say, let's now go and find ourselves a data lakehouse that we can plug in over the top of a lake. So off we went to AWS Summit, I think it was in 2022, and we looked at all the different providers and we met a company called Dremio. You'd see the big narwhal in the building. And we ended up partnering with Dremio, and I'll touch on Dremio in a little bit later in our journey. When we did the implementation, we did a phased implementation. For obvious reasons, we moved our own domain into Dremio first. Because we were pushing to add in the new software, we said, look, we'll take the pain going in first, understanding how to easily transition the teams in, and then use that knowledge to then move everybody else in. And that also made our team the center of excellence of how to successfully move into the Lakehouse. And we continuously worked with our business teams to give them access to training materials, guidance, etc. But also through Dremio, they provide you with Dremio University. So that really helped us a lot as well, because we didn't actually have to write that much documentation. We could just onboard the teams, tell them to go to Dremio Uni, do a few courses, learn how to use the platform safely, and then come back, show us your certification, and we'll onboard you onto the platforms. So if we focus in on why did we go for a data lakehouse? Well, if I give you a little bit of background of where we started. So whilst we were going on this journey in 21 saying, look, we've got lots of problems with our data and the way we're managing our data, our business also decided that they actually want to move from our legacy platforms to a brand new administrator. And they want to move and unify all those platforms into a single area. What that meant for us was that was great, because our business basically said to us, here's a blank checkbook, you've got a greenfield build, fill your boots. So for us, that was an amazing time, because we could basically say, look, we know we've got all these problems on our data management and governance side of things. We know we've got all these problems with our infrastructure. How do we make this better? Well, we started looking at what was our pain points in our current setup. And if I sort of just compare our traditional warehouse with what a modern data lakehouse would give you, like for us, our traditional SQL Server was primarily structured data. It was very difficult to add anything that wasn't structured into that SQL database. Whereas obviously for the modern data lakehouse, for us, underneath it's AWS S3, structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data goes in there. And if you look at our setup that we were going to have post our business moving on to the new third-party administrator, we were actually going to have all three forms of that data flowing into our lake. So we had to go and look to move into a data lake at that stage. From a storage point of view, obviously the cost kept on increasing for us on the SQL boxes. We had to constantly add more storage, and obviously that just became very costly. Whereas at least for us in AWS, you've got storage tiers in there. So you've got your standard tiers where all of your data that you access frequently is in there. You've got infrequent access tiers that's cheaper to manage and maintain. And then you've got Glacier as well, where you can really put data into cold storage that you're not going to touch that often. And what that meant for us is we could really manage the cost of storing our data efficiently. Scalability was also a big thing for us. So if you look at Dremio for us at the moment, so Dremio is a stateless query engine, and that's amazing for us because what that means is when a user or a process demands the data, Dremio would go into AWS, spin up the instance, the resource, provide the data to the user or the process. If there's no more users or processes needing that instance, it tears it down and your cost goes away. Now, obviously, if I compare that to our SQL Server setup, we had an EC2 instance running 24/7. We had batch processing running 24/7. It was very expensive to run. So modernizing our stack there meant, if you use tools like Dremio's, like the Lakehouse tools that's out there, they are intelligent and they will just use resource when they need it and then tear down when they don't. Flexibility was a big thing for us as well. Obviously, we knew we were migrating to a new provider. That meant our rigid schema was going to break. It's going to change over time, and it's going to change over multiple years. So schema on read and schema evolution was really, really big for us, and we needed to be able to. We needed a platform that can handle that. On the data processing side, look, on the SQL side, we used to do batch processing all the time. We now work in a place where everything is either real-time or event-driven feeds coming into our lake, and it's much, much more efficient in the way that we process. On the governance and observability side of things, I'll mention quickly, we built our own data quality framework internally. I actually touch on it in the next slide, so I won't talk about it too much there. But in the modern data lakehouse world, you've got a plethora of tools out there. If you just go and have a look around, I mean, we partnered in the end with Elementary, but you've got Data Hub, you've got Monte Carlo. There's loads of really good solutions out there, and I would 100% say if you're going down this route of building yourself a modern data platform, that's one of the first things you want to do is get yourself a good partner in terms of your lakehouse, but also immediately focusing on your data quality and your observability as well. And then finally, on the machine learning and AI readiness side of things, look, in 2021, we weren't even thinking of doing ML and AI or anything along those lines, but we knew it was coming. So we wanted to make sure that we were in an environment where those possibilities are there, and for our engineers to have access to the tools very close to the data with very minimal data movement. So if I give you a quick overview of our data platform, look, I'm not going to go over all of the boxes on here. It will take us too long to do that, but I'll focus in on 3 or 4 of the areas which is important to me, and hopefully it's important to you as well from a management point of view. The first area I wanted to focus in on is our ingestion box on there. Now you can't really see what's on there, so I'll explain to you. So we use AWS native services to move our data into our lake and around our lake. Now obviously you could put any other of those tools out there in that box, but for us it made a lot of sense to do that. It simplified our stack. We've got really good data engineers that work in AWS, and it's worked really, really well for us. Next to that is obviously our storage. Most of our lake is S3, but we also have still got SQL servers in there, so SQL RDS and some EC2s. And then next to that, you've got your transformation layers. So in there, I want to focus in a bit more on DBT. For those that don't use DBT or aren't that au fait with what it does, well, for us it was transformational, literally, because if you think about it, one of the things you try and solve as a data management function is you want to give your business the ability to see the data product specifications, see the lineage, see the tests, all of those nice things, right? And then from an engineer's point of view, on the other side is they don't want to write documentation and Confluence and do all sorts of stuff, right? They just want to code and get it done. DBT really does that all for us. So to give you an example, for us, it is the glue that puts all the transformations for us into Dremio. So it's basically SQL models as code. It runs all your DBT tests, so your unit tests that you need to run against your data runs in there. You've got access to DBT docs, so a simple specification document. And you've also got your data lineage. It's all built in. And if I had to take one file and said I'm going to build a new product, well, there's 2 files really. You've got your file that's your SQL view, and you've got your file that's your YAML. And those 2 files are all both being built by the engineers and the analysts. On top of that, you've got Dremio, our data lakehouse. So Dremio is really the shop window for our business to come in, right? This is where they come in and they discover the data, and they can have a play and analyze the data. But really, if I look at Dremio and I look at the highlights that Dremio brings to the party for us, look, Dremio is a high-performance engine. What I mean by that is when we first implemented Dremio, we still had our SQL Server running on the side. For those that work in AWS, it was a 4x large, 128 gig RAM, 16 vCPU box. It was huge. It was costing us thousands of dollars a month to run that box. And when I ran the same query in there that's optimized in an unoptimized Dremio on the lowest cost instance with no reflections turned on, which is basically their materialized views, I got 10x performance jump. And that's reading Parquet files, by the way, rather than reading anything else. The other beautiful thing about Dremio is they work with virtual data sets. So this was one of the selling points for us when we spoke to them, is basically they're a skin over the top of your lake, and you basically build views on top of views on top of views. So what that means to you is, in the old world, people might take copies of data and move them sideways, and then all of a sudden you've got the same data everywhere. With Dremio, the unique thing about that is you've just got code, and all your data is just in your S3. So if I had, for example, a client data set, and I had Dave that wanted some client data, Dave would have his own view of that data, but it's not the actual data, it's just the query to the data and the transformation. The other area that was quite good about Dremio, now we've not actually used it, but it was one of the selling points when we looked at it, was they had the functionality called text to SQL. So it's a low entry point for somebody that isn't a SQL analyst, who doesn't know how to write SQL properly, but they can come in and they can say, look, what was the revenues for 2025, generate me the SQL, and it would generate you the SQL as well. So from a self-service point of view, it's an easy way to get those users to come in, to experience, to explore the data, but also for them to start learning how to use SQL, which, by the way, I'm hoping everybody would agree SQL is the language of choice, right? The other areas that I want to quickly touch on is elementary down here. Now you'll notice I've got a few banners that says new on there. Elementary is pretty much brand new for us. We're implementing it as we speak. But one of the areas that I wanted to focus in on there is the data observability side of things. Now look, we had data observability in place, but we did it over multiple different tools, and it really wasn't very great the way we've set it up. So we went away and we said to our business, look, we need you to give us a little bit of money. We need to go and put in observability software, because this was the final piece to our puzzle, was to be able to put our hands around our platform and say, it's fully governed, we know what we're doing in there, and by the way, business, here's a dashboard that shows you the quality of this data. So I would strongly recommend that whenever you go down this route, it doesn't have to be elementary. There's plenty of good tools out there and providers out there, and we've spoken to most of them. They all do pretty much the same thing, but I would definitely say go and have a look into that, because it helps you a lot, especially from a business point of view, to get them to buy into your view, into your vision, what you want to build. If you can show them that you have control of your data quality, you can show them that your data products are certified, you can show them the ownership, who's owning the data products, the definitions are there, all the tests are in place and they can see all that, plus you've got your incident management all sorted. It's a really good place to be. And then finally, I'll just quickly go through the lessons learned, and then this would be, I promise you, my last slide, and then I'll open up for some questions. So look, on the lessons learned side of things for us, these were sort of 5 things that I wanted to play back to you that sort of stood out to me. Look, we learned many other lessons, but for me, these were some of the things that when I look back, I wish we did better in some cases. So I would say define your identity early. And what I mean by that is, in our early days, we didn't know whether we want to develop software or if we wanted to be a data management team. So in our early days, we built our own data quality framework to measure our data quality. That project took over 12 months to do. It cost us thousands and thousands of hours and pounds in resources to build that data quality framework. We had to get in specialist engineers to build it for us. We had to manage it, we had to debug it, we needed to support it. It basically drained our team, and we became a support function, just running data quality. Now, if I fast forward to today, we brought in elementary. It's not cost us even half the money it cost us to bring in elementary. It brings with itself many, many more features as well. So I would definitely say, if I was you, think about that when you go on your journey. Are you in this world to develop and develop software, or are you here to manage data? So the next one I wanted to cover is simplicity over novelty. And what I mean by that is, look at simplifying your stack. You're here today, there's plenty of really good tools and providers out there, but you don't have to use every single one of them in your stack. So for us, if you saw on our previous slide, we simplified just the data movement part of our ingestion pipeline, made that AWS native, and it works a treat. It's one less thing in our stack that's uncomplicated. Leverage fully managed services where you can. I know a lot of people can't do that, but for us, as I explained with our data quality framework, if you stand on the shoulders of giants, there's people here, very clever people, that build software